Hi, my name is Emory Edwards. I'm the first author and presenter for the paper That's in the Eye of the Beholder, Layers of Interpretation in Image Descriptions for Fictionalized Representations of People with Disabilities. I completed this work with the help of my colleagues at UC Irvine's Department of Informatics and with the support of collaborators at Google. Let's jump in with the motivation for this paper. Fictional depictions of disability are becoming more common in media. From promotional images to stock photos to clip art and beyond, the desire for more inclusive imagery means the number and complexity of fictional depictions of disability is growing. And making those fictional representations of disability accessible to actual people with disabilities through methods such as image descriptions is vital. However, the problem of how to properly describe complex disability identities is a non-trivial one. For example, if you can't ask an image subject how they identify, are you meant to guess the right language and wording to use based on what you perceive the figure's disability to be? Within the field of accessible computing, image accessibility has been studied extensively. Research on image accessibility done by Morris et al., Bigham et al., Gleason et al., among many others, have established the necessity of image descriptions for online content and the various methods by which digital images can be made more accessible. Of particular relevance to us, and building on much of this same body of work, Bennett et al. Published a paper at CHI 2021 focusing on image descriptions and identity. One thing they found was that including descriptions of social identities of subjects in image descriptions was deemed particularly important when assessing the quality of a media representation. And two, they emphasize the value of letting image subjects determine the identity language they want to have used for themselves. This makes sense in the context of images of real people, but left us with the question of what should be done when image subjects cannot be asked for their preferred terminology. This led us to consider image descriptions for fictional representations of disability and how we might make sure depictions of disability in media were described correctly. So we formulated this study around the central research question: how do we write appropriate and sensitive image descriptions of fictional depictions of disability? To answer this question, we partnered with collaborators at Google who are developing a set of approximately 40 artistic renderings of user identities, including representations of older adults, people with physical disabilities, and non-human animals. Google had commissioned this image set to serve as internal and external tools for developers and designers that could prompt and reflect on inclusivity and diversity in their user base. Of those, we selected the 9 images shown here, depicting in brief an older woman watering a plant, a youth holding a skateboard with their prosthetic arm, a service dog, a wheelchair user getting groceries, a multiracial LGBT couple holding their baby, a white cane user holding a cup of coffee, a model with vitiligo, a green bookworm popping out of a book, and a blue-haired person signing "thank you," seen here in GIF form. Note that for a more thorough description of the avatar project for which the images were created, as well as a full list of images used and detailed image descriptions, please see the paper. We chose these images for their representation, or potential to represent, visible and invisible disabilities, and we then iteratively co-designed image descriptions for them with participants. We conducted 9 focus groups and 19 interviews, all remote, with 25 total participants, all of whom self-identified as having one or more disabilities. We ended up with 5 high-level issues relating to the creation of appropriate image descriptions for fictionalized representations of disability. 1, disability in context. 2, describing disability. 3, level of detail. 4, sites for introducing bias. And 5, ableism in image descriptions. I can't go into all of them in this presentation, but I'll look more closely at describing disability and sites for introducing bias. For the full themes and findings, see the paper. Within the describing disability theme, we include several concrete suggestions our participants gave us. For example, we presented this relevant section of one image description, quote, an adult with light skin tone and short blonde hair against a red background. They are smirking and wearing sunglasses, holding a white cane in one hand and a steaming coffee in the other. Considering the importance of disability identity and disability first language to some subcommunities, we asked our participant if it made more sense to instead describe the figure as a blind adult, to which she replied, quote, I kind of like holding a cane because it could be someone with a service dog or someone with a white cane, and either way, it would be like a blind adult. From this and other comments, we derived the recommendation that when describing fictionalized representations where there is not a real person who can claim or choose an identity label, it can be more accurate, specific, and inclusive to describe the assistive devices that signal disability instead of trying to assign the fictional subject an identity. The sites for introducing bias theme is shown in this quote. A lot of stereotypes get still passed down to the visually impaired community because we rely so heavily on what is described to you, end quote. Image describers functioned as gatekeepers and translators of visual information about identity. Or in the following description, a quote, illustration of a service dog with a green collar and silver harness looking sadly at an ice cream on the ground, participants worried that focusing the image on the dog might perpetuate ableism, where service animals are seen as more important than the disabled people they are serving. Ableism or other biases can be introduced at multiple levels in the image creation and description process. This brings us to one of the key conclusions we draw in the paper, although see our written discussion for more details. We argue that the production and reception of fictionalized representations of disability, in fact, has three layers at work, here depicted in the three-level pyramid. The base of the pyramid is the real identity or identity group that exists in the world. The first level is the artist's fictionalized representation, where they interpret the real identity through their goals and perspective. The next layer is the describer's interpretation, which uses their own past knowledge and potentially unacknowledged biases to convey or potentially misrepresent the artist's intent. Finally, the reader's interpretation sits at the top, where readers take the description and/or visual information to make a decision about the final value of the representation. What we realized was that our study particularly highlighted the role of describers, in this case us, and readers. For example, what assumptions were we making about the identity of the white cane user? Was that image necessarily of a blind adult, or could it just as easily have been a low vision person who uses a white cane? One area we intended to study in future work is the artist's role by working with and interviewing artists to understand how their own knowledge of disability impacts their art and the eventual descriptions of it. And that's it. Thank you again to Google, to my fellow Insight Lab members, and to our participants and reviewers. For more details, please read our paper, That's in the Eye of the Beholder, Layers of Interpretation in Image Descriptions for Fictional Representations of People with Disabilities. And thank you all so much for listening.